Hi everyone and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Gaia. I'm an Italian currently living in Seoul, South Korea. And in today's video, we're going to talk about apartment hunting in Seoul, South Korea. I have watched so many videos on the topic when I was back in Italy, preparing myself to come here, and now I cannot believe that I'm making my own. So I am very excited about that. But yeah, so if you're interested in learning more about the whole process, then please keep on watching. Okay, so I am going to jump straight into it, but I do want to sort of organize and divide this video into, unofficially, into two parts. Part number one is the things that I did before coming to Korea, and part number two is the things that I did after I came to Korea. And then at the end, I am going to give you my thoughts and considerations on, maybe some mistakes that I made or things that I could have done in a better way. And I'm also going to give you some tips from my experience, things that I've learned and I want you to know if you're coming to Korea. Okay, so let's get into it. Let's start with things that I did before coming to Korea. I'm gonna give you a little background, a little context. I arrived in Korea earlier in April, at the beginning of the month, but I had booked all my tickets in January, so I had a lot of time to prepare. And so the very first thing I did was doing my research. And this is the very first thing that I recommend you do, whether you're coming to Korea or to any other country. Do your research on the country, the city that you're going to, and how the real estate works there, the types of apartment that you can find there, the prices, all that kind of jazz. It is very important to do your own research because you want to be as prepared as possible. You're still going to have many surprises because things never go according to your plans. There's always going to be something that just goes wrong, or it goes differently than you had predicted, but you want to minimize, to reduce that possibility as much as possible. So you want to be as prepared as possible so that you have as few surprises as possible again. So again, wherever it is that you're going, I would recommend do your research thoroughly. It's better to be overly prepared than to not be ready, not be prepared when something new comes up. So yeah, just research on, specifically in Korea, on how the real estate works, the types of apartments, etc., etc. So let me explain very shortly, very briefly about the different types of housing and the renting system here in Korea. So as for the apartment, the types of housing here in Korea, we have the most popular are office styles, which are a combination of office and hotel, and these are basically apartments that are meant to be your house, but also they can also be your office, so you can register your business at the same address of your house. And these are probably the most popular, especially among foreigners. Then we have apartments, which I believe they are the most luxurious one, so I don't even know much about them, but I think they come in very, very high buildings and they're very expensive. Then we have villas, which are actually still apartments but in shorter buildings, so they're usually up to 6 floors, and they're usually located in a more residential area. These are the types of buildings, I want to say, that you can live in. The apartment that you might live in can be a 1-room or a 2-room. In my case, it's a 1-room, which is a studio apartment. And as for the different types of renting, how the renting system works, so there are 3 types of renting here in Korea. The first one is 월세, which is just like in the West. It's basically the monthly rent system. So you pay a deposit and then you pay your monthly fee each month. But it does work a little bit differently here in Korea, at least compared to my country, Italy, and I think to Europe in general, because here the deposit is pretty high, or it's higher, because the average deposit or key money is around 5 to 10 million won. I would say more on the 10 million won side, which is around 7,000 and something euro slash dollars. I'm probably going to put the exact amount down here. So this is the average key money and deposit that you need to put down right away, and then on top of that, each month you have to pay the rent, which I think it goes, the very minimum is like 300,000 won, but that's usually higher, but it really depends on the type of apartment that you're renting, the area, and a lot of other things. So that's usually the minimum, but it can be up to, you know, 1 or 2 million Korean won. And then we have the second system is the chonse, which is basically you give a huge amount of money up front as your deposit, and this amount of money usually covers the price of the house, of the apartment, and then you do not pay anything for your rent, or I think maybe only utilities, if anything. And so basically you gave everything up front and you don't have to pay anything for the time of your contract. And we're talking about here, the deposit is some like 200 million won, something like that. Again, always depends on the type of house that you are renting. And then the last type I don't know much about, I think it's called panchonse. It's like half wholesale, half chonse. So you give less deposit, but you pay a bit of rent. So something like that. In my case, I rented a wholesale. I wanted a wholesale, and that's what I got. And it's becoming more and more popular because of foreigners. When foreigners come here, they obviously do not have that amount of money to like do the chonse, so most foreigners just go for wholesale. So this is very briefly how it works in Korea. I want to say like the types of renting and of housing that you have to know a little bit if you're thinking of coming to Korea. These are just the basics, obviously. And usually how this goes is you have a budget, so you decide on a certain amount of deposit that you can afford to pay and a certain amount of rent that, you know, again, you can afford to pay each month. And then with the landlord, you can play a little bit with the numbers, so the higher the deposit, the lower the rent will be, and vice versa. So based on your needs and availability, you can a little bit play with these numbers usually, but it's not a rule. So this is just an introduction to the system in Korea, the real estate and how it works. But again, I suggest you go even further and deeper and do your own research. Also and this is very important, also to understand, again, what is your budget and what kind of house do you want and do you like, because you have to be in that house for the next at least year, if not even longer than that. And this brings me on to point number 2. The second thing that I did before coming to Korea was I downloaded these apps, which are Chikbang, Tabang, Peter Pan's, and Naver 부동산, which I don't think you can download, but it's a website. And these are all apps / website platforms for apartment hunting, where you can look for apartments. And I actually use these websites / apps mostly to look and to get an idea again of what was on the market, what it was that I wanted, that I liked, what my requirements, I guess, were, and yeah, that kind of stuff. And the reason why I say this is because these apps are actually known to not be very reliable. Most of the listings on these websites are actually scams, or they're not true to reality, and they do that to kind of lure you in and then they show you an apartment that is more expensive. So again, I would say look, but in my case, I knew that that was the situation, so I wasn't like, oh my god, I want this and that, and I'm gonna call them. It was more like, oh, I'm looking, this is the kind of apartment that I like. And the reason why I did that is I also took screenshots, etc. It was all to show in the future, to show all these pictures and to give all my requirements to the budongsan, to the realtor, so that I had the exact idea of what I wanted, and I was as precise as possible so that we could find an apartment that was, you know, again, as close to my taste and needs as possible. Which brings me on to thing number 3 that I did and that I recommend doing. Is this is probably the most important, is I looked for an English speaking real estate agent in my case, Seoul, South Korea. You can go on your own and just take the whole process and just take care of the whole process on your own. So look for an apartment, contact the landlord, and just sign the contract and everything. But personally, I wanted the reassurance of a real estate agent, of someone who is a professional, knows what they're doing. They're bound by, you know, also an agreement, a contract. They want their fee, so they want everything to go smoothly and to get done as soon as possible. And most importantly, someone who could speak Korean, because I wasn't very confident personally in my Korean. I could speak a very conversational Korean, and I knew that I didn't want the stress of doing everything on my own, having to use translators to understand the other person, and not being sure of what was happening and whether it was legit, because you're still foreigner. And as much as I believe that Koreans are very, very good people, you never know, you know, you never know what could happen and what you could be signing on that contract. And so I wanted the extra reassurance, and personally, I really recommend this. But you do need to keep in mind that, as I think with any other country, you do need to pay a brokerage fee the moment the contract is done. You found your apartment, the realtor found the apartment for you and everything. You need to pay a brokerage fee, and we're gonna get into. And the brokerage fee is usually around, you know, it can go from 200,000 won to like 500,000 won. I think even more, based on the apartment that you're renting, as always. But yeah, so I would definitely recommend taking this step and saving some money to pay the realtor, because again, you're in a foreign country, so you do not want to risk doing anything that is like illegal or that could cause you any troubles. Once you have found a realtor, I would again suggest finding more than one, just in case. And I think there's, if I can find it again, I'm gonna link it in the comments, in the section down below, but there's like a list of English speaking realtors in Seoul, and I think in South Korea in general. If I can find it again, I'm gonna link it down below. And then what you wanna do is, about like 2 weeks before you come to Korea, even less than that, to be honest, you can hit them up and be like, hey, I'll be coming to Korea on this date, can you help me find an apartment? And I contacted 2 just in case, and what they both did is they made me book an appointment to go to their office, to meet at their office. You can contact them even before 2 weeks, even earlier than that, but to be honest, it's not necessary, because the market in Korea, the real estate market, works so fast. Apartments go by, they are rented daily. Like they are put on the market one day, and the next day they're already rented or sold. And so it's really no point in you contacting them like a month in advance, because they're not gonna start looking for apartments already for you, trust me. So these are the things that I did before coming to Korea, and now on to what I did after, because this is when the hard part begins, I guess. So after I came to Korea, I had my first appointment with one of my realtors, one of my real estate agents. My very first full day in Seoul, You probably saw that in another video if you watched them. I had my appointment the very first day that I was in Seoul with my real estate agent. We met, and basically my budget in the beginning was 2 million for the deposit and around 500,000 for the rent, and then not including utilities, obviously. So this was my budget, which I knew was low, but I also knew I had seen some foreigners on YouTube who had managed to find an apartment even with this budget, or I mean with that budget for the deposit, which is a bit low. And so I was positive. I was like, I'm gonna find something. So I walk into the real estate office, and he shows me 2 apartments, and he's like, okay, these are the 2 apartments that are available. And I'm like, what? And mind you, the area that I had chosen that I wanted to live in was around the station of Shilimyeok, which I'm probably gonna insert a picture here, is on the other side of the river, compared like from like Hongdae or Myeongdong or Seoul Station. Kind of like Gangnam. Gangnam is also on the other side of the river. And the reason for that, why I chose that area, is just because it was cheaper but still very well connected. But so the realtor that I contacted actually was around the area. His office was based around the area, so they specialized in the area. And he was like, yes, we have these 2 apartments. And I was like, what? I knew that most of the listings on those apps that I showed you earlier were scams, but still I didn't think that of the hundreds of apartments, probably even more, that I had seen in those previous like 2-3 months, I couldn't believe that it all came down to these 2 apartments. But you know, I was like, at this point I had just gone into Korea. My Korean was very rusty. I didn't know how it worked. I was like, okay, well, let's go look at them. So we go look at them, and the very first apartment, I'm very sorry, but everything was happening so fast that I forgot to film it. But basically, if I can find them, I'm gonna insert pictures of a very similar apartment. But basically it was in a very old, or I mean older building. There were bars at the window. There was another building, I think, next to it, so it basically came in, no sunlight came in. And yeah, it was just, I hated it, to be honest. I hated it right away. Went to the second apartment. This one I filmed. The second apartment was a bit better, I guess, but very small. It was newer. All the furniture was newer. There were no bars on the window, but there was this like, I don't know, panel, which was fixed. It could not be removed, and he said it was for privacy, because it was like there was like some texture to it, and you could not see outside, and people obviously from outside or from other buildings couldn't see inside your apartment. But I was like, how am I supposed to have a window and I cannot even look outside of it? This thing cannot even be removed. It makes no sense. Plus it was so small. I barely had the space to walk. Now looking back, where would I have put my luggages? Why are luggages always the biggest problem for foreigners? There's literally, if you don't know this, storage space in Korea is a big problem. And so I don't even have a lot of stuff. I can manage with my clothes, my shoes, whatever, but my luggages, where am I supposed to put my luggages? You know, so thank God I didn't get that apartment, because at that time I was like, this is my only choice. This is my only choice. Thank God I did not get that apartment. I told him like, oh, I'm not quite convinced. And he was like, we need to move fast because, you know, they're gonna rent it. These apartments go by really fast. But I was like, no, I'm not convinced. Can I think about it? And let's get straight into my tips right away as the process goes, and my thoughts on it, what I would have done differently, and what I recommend you to do, and my suggestions, etc. Do not be pressured. Another thing that I didn't mention before, and that I did technically this something that I did before coming to Korea that has to do with my apartment hunting process is I rented an Airbnb. Obviously, I had rented an Airbnb for the first like 10 days that I spent in Korea. So this is another thing that I very much like recommend you do, obviously, but I mean, I would expect this is an obvious thing. You cannot expect to just go in Korea and find an apartment right away. Prepare to like maybe be looking for an apartment for like a week. I would say take 2 weeks, 10 days to 2 weeks, where it's a time you give yourself to find an apartment. So book an Airbnb in the meantime, something where you can at least go sleep at night. So that's what I did. So if your realtor is pressuring you to do things fast and go fast, do not feel pressure. Tell them if you don't like a place, an apartment, do not get it. You are going to stay in your apartment for the next year at the very least. So you want a place that you like and that you feel comfortable in, that you're satisfied with. So do not settle if you do not like the place. Now looking back, I do not know if he was doing that because he genuinely knew and thought that, you know, it would get rented like that and that was my only option, or if he was just pressuring me and he wanted to get the just deal done as soon as possible. And this is the problem when you're in a foreign country. You do not know very well how things work. On top of that, you do not speak the language, so it's very hard to just not feel pressured. I understand, but do not rush it. After we saw the apartment, I told him like I'm not convinced. At this point, I saw how the situation was going and I was like, you know what? I saw all these apartments on these apps. Let me show them to him. And even though I know earlier I said that most of them were scams, and I still do stand by that, but at that point I was kind of like, I was desperate. So I was like, you know, maybe there's a small chance that one of them is true to the listing and that it's available. So what we did is we went back to the office and we started both looking on these apps, on Naver, on Chikbang, Dabang, and every time I would find an apartment that suited my needs, I would show it to him, he would call, and we did this. We called probably like at least 20, 30 probably landlords, and every single time we got rejected. Not rejected as in like, no, we do not want you, or you a foreigner or whatever, but because supposedly they were already gone. Even a listing that had been like published like the previous day or even the same day, it was either gone or I don't know. All I heard was 없어요, 없어요, 없어요. So it's like, oh, it's not there anymore. It's not available. Okay. So, and at this point it's like 1 p.m. I'm hungry. I've been up since like 8 and I'm just very surrendered. I'm very stressed, and I thought, you know what, I'm just gonna get that second apartment because I was that desperate and I was losing hope. Basically, I was losing hope and I was about to get an apartment, but I told him, give me until like later this afternoon to tell you. And I went back home because I had to work. And later that afternoon, he texts me like, oh, there's this other apartment that is becoming available. And he shows me some pictures and I'm like, this is actually really nice. And he's like, can you come to the office? I couldn't go to the office. So he went to look at the apartment by himself. He took a video and showed it to me, and it was basically pretty much perfect. It checked all my boxes and requirements. It was a bit farther away than what I had in mind, but not even excessively. It was very much doable, especially considering how the situation was going. The only thing was the deposit was higher. The deposit was 5 million Korean won, which at this point, to be honest, wasn't a problem anymore. I had already decided previously, prior to coming to Korea, that if I couldn't find an apartment with like 2-3 million Korean won in deposit, I would increase it to 5 million So I was, see, when I talk about being prepared, I was prepared. It was my last chance, but I was prepared for it. And so when he showed me this apartment, I was like, I really like it. And we decided to go look at it the next morning, and if I liked it, I would sign the contract. And the next morning we went to look at it, and I really liked it, and it's my current apartment. I signed the contract that day, so it was like my second full day in Korea. He signed the contract and he told me I could move in a couple days later because the tenant was still living there. So the price on this apartment, like I said, was 5 million in deposit, and then 380 in rent plus 70 in utilities, and the utilities excluded, basically only included internet. The deposit, obviously you're going to get back, so it's not money that you've lost, it's just money that you put aside. So considering that the monthly rent, it's not that high, and it was within my budget, so that's good. So, and that is the apartment that I'm in today, so I'm very happy about that. Speaking of requirements and how we checked all my boxes, and I mentioned this at the beginning of the video, you want to when you're doing your research, you want to figure out what kind of apartment you like, and what are your, again, I guess, requirements, your conditions. So for example, you know, you want it furnished or not furnished, you want it on what floor, or you want an office style, a one room, you want sunlight, etc., all that kind of stuff. So in my case, my biggest requirement, and honestly probably the only one that could be considered a real requirement, like if this was not part of the deal, like I didn't want the apartment, was the sunlight thing. I am just a person who thrives on good weather and sun, the sunlight and all that, so I could never live in a place that is dark, or where the sunlight doesn't shine in. And I remember very clearly, last time I was in Korea, I lived for some time, like a month, in a basement apartment. I was so miserable, and I didn't realize it was for that reason until I moved to another apartment where I had a window and the sun came in. So I didn't want that experience, definitely not for a whole year. So my biggest and only requirement was I needed sunlight. So sunlight. And the apartment that I'm in right now has a big window, and it's facing, I think, southeast, so it's perfect. And then other requirements that I had, where I didn't want the building to be too old. I didn't really care too much how old it was, but I guess I didn't want it to be in bad conditions. That's maybe better put. And if the bed was in the apartment, it would have been better, but that was something that I could negotiate on. And my apartment came with nothing, basically, with no bed. So as you can see, I definitely compromised. So yeah, apart from that, obviously the budget thing, I could not go over a certain, especially the rent, over a certain budget. So these were my requirements, and like I said, this apartment definitely checked the most important one, which was the sunlight thing. And okay, so on to the final part of the video. Let's talk about my thoughts overall, my feelings, and some tips that I have for you. So my thoughts and feelings before coming to Korea and before experiencing all that, where I have watched, like I said at the beginning, I have watched many videos of people apartment hunting in Korea, in Seoul specifically, and they always talked about how stressful it was. Some of them took like literally 2 days, and others took, you know, maybe a week, 10 days to find the proper apartment right for them. So I considered, like, I thought, okay, it's gonna take me like maybe 5-7 days to find an apartment, and I thought, but you know, everything's gonna go smoothly. I'm gonna find something, it's cool. And as I said at the beginning, you can do as much research as you'd like, watch as many videos and other people's experiences, but there's always gonna be a twist in the story. And the twist for me was that I could not find anything with my budget, and that I almost got an apartment that I really didn't like because I felt pressured and because that was supposedly the only option for me. So my thoughts and feelings were, in those only 2 days that it took me to find an apartment, and that the whole process was basically happening, it happened in 2 days, I was very stressed. Thankfully it was very short, but I was stressed. They were right to say that it's a stressful process. Mostly mentally, it's like, am I gonna find an apartment? And it wasn't even like I didn't have a house, an accommodation. I had an accommodation for the next 10 days, but for some reason you feel so like you need to find it and to be in a rush and to hurry up, etc. And even though I didn't like the Airbnb that I was staying at, I still had somewhere to go sleep at night, so it wasn't like I was homeless. But it was very stressful because for a moment I thought, oh my god, I'm not gonna find an apartment, but eventually I did. And this brings me to tip number 1, which I already mentioned. Do not feel pressured, do not rush, take your time. If you, like me, have booked an Airbnb for the time being, for like the first 10 days, 2 weeks, whatever, take your time. If you cannot find an apartment on that day, the next day there's going to be more listings. So do not feel pressured, not even if your realtor is pressuring you. Tell them, using your translator or whatever else, tell them, no, I don't like it, I'm going to take my time. You know, there's definitely, again, I still don't know why my realtor pressured me like that, probably to get the money. He wanted to get the deal done as soon as possible, to get his money, which is not cool, obviously. Do not let them, you know, they're gonna get their money when they found you an apartment that you really like. That's what they're there for, that's their job. So take your time. If you have those 10 days, use them if you need to. Which actually brings me to tip number 2, and I guess it has to do with apartment hunting, but more so with moving into your new apartment after you found an apartment. It was really useful for me because I found an apartment so quickly on my second day, and I moved like 2 days after that. I still had like a week left into my Airbnb. It was very useful because instead of getting all my stuff all at once, my 2 big luggages and, you know, my backpack and whatever, and moving to my new apartment, I basically went there on different trips to my Airbnb, gathered some stuff, and went comfortably to my new apartment to kind of slowly move in different takes, I guess. So each time I would go with my small luggage, which is obviously more comfortable and easier to carry, I would fill it in, I would go back to my new apartment, and did that basically until almost the last day available at my Airbnb. And that was really comfortable, really good. So if you can, obviously, if you have the money, you can know that, consider maybe booking 2 or 3 days extra at your Airbnb so that you can use them to move all your stuff into your new apartment in more than one go. That's just an idea, obviously, but that was something that was actually really useful for me. Another very important tip that I have is make sure that your bank can make transfers, money transfers to Korean bank accounts and Korean banks, because I did not check that with my bank because I don't know, I never thought about it. I thought it was obvious, I thought they could, but apparently not. They cannot. Not all banks can make money transfers to all banks in the world, to all also foreign currencies. And so for my bank that wasn't the case, so that became an issue when I had to make my deposit, to give my money to the landlord for the deposit and the first rent for the first month. And so I had to give it to her in cash, which is not ideal because it's better to have like the transaction you know, just the proof of the transaction on the bank, on your app, whatever, to just have proof of that instead of cash. And not only that, but with cash, I obviously had withdraw limits, daily and weekly withdrawal limits. So I had to give her the money in more than one take, because I had to withdraw the money on multiple days and on the course of like 2 weeks. So that was another stressful part, because obviously you want to get it done as soon as possible, and you want as much, again, reassurance. You want it to be a safe transaction, a safe process. So I would have preferred, obviously, to do everything through deposit and, you know, through the bank, so that I had the extra reassurance, the extra step that everything was written down somewhere. But in the end, it had to go the way it had to go. So I would say make sure that your bank can do that, and also maybe tell your bank, contact them in advance before going to Korea and tell them, hey, I will be going to Korea and I will probably be either withdrawing or just sending a lot of my money, but everything's fine, it's just me, I'm doing this, because you might encounter some issues with your bank, that they might block your card or your account, thinking that it's like a scam, it's like phishing. So yeah, this is like another couple of tips that I would suggest. So I'm editing this video and I forgot to mention another tip that I have, and that is, if you don't know the app Papago, I would definitely recommend downloading it. Basically, this app is a normal translator from Korean to English and vice versa, and I think it was made by the Naver company family, so like you can trust it with your Korean translations, and on top of that, it has the function where you can take a picture of a label of something that has Korean writing on it, and it will translate it for you in your preferred language, in, you know, my case, English. So I think that's a very, very useful function, because even though it might not be the most accurate function, it still will give you roughly the gist of what that particular, whether it's a label, a document, is talking about. And I was thinking of this specifically for the signing of the contract moment, because I knew this app, but for some reason I had never downloaded it before, and I only downloaded it after I signed my contract. But I had it that day when I signed the contract. I would have been able to take a picture of the contract right there and then, and kind of understand a little bit better what was happening, what I was signing, because as much as again, I trusted my realtor, I trusted, you know, the whole process, Korean people, etc. It's still, I prefer personally to make sure that I know exactly what it is that I'm doing, especially when I am signing a contract, signing a document. So again, I would have been able, had I had the app, I would have been able to just take a picture and kind of understand what it was that they were talking about, because in the meantime they were talking in Korean, and my realtor was explaining everything to the landlord, etc. And I was kind of there like, what are they talking about, you know? And even though my realtor had translated a piece of the contract to me, mainly the things that, you know, I cared about the most, it was like 3-4 papers of, like, the contract was like 3-4 papers, so in total. So I obviously don't know still to this day what most of that was, and I would have liked that I had the app to be able to know right then and there, for an extra security, sense of safety and security. So that's a good recommendation. Just in general, for your everyday life as well, download Papago so that you can understand labels on products or signs, listings down the road. Yeah. So yeah, I think that's pretty much it. If you watched until the end, thank you so much. I hope my experience and my tips were useful for you, and if you have any other questions, please let me know in the comments down below, and I will see you in the next video. Thank you. Bye.